Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Happy Monday, Dr. Paul. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing well, and I'd like to visit with you today on a subject that's been in the news all weekend.
Yeah.
And we have to decide whether the indictment of these bad guys, these Russian conspirators, will settle this whole thing. Maybe case closed. But the a declaration from the indictment said that the Russians, these 13 Russians, conspired to defraud the United States. I mean, that's serious. That's very, very serious. But my big question that came to my mind, yes, but is this exactly true? And when you look behind the scenes and read what was really happening, it's a real stretch. And I want to just talk about, what this might mean in terms of foreign policy and what it might mean about the Trump campaign, what it means for the Hillary campaign. And it looks like maybe several groups benefited by this, and it looks like it was easy to blame those Russians. It was all Russia's fault.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, first of all, it was dumped down the black hole of a Friday news cycle. If it was a big showstopper, you can bet it would not be dumped there. It does show that Mueller did something, got these indictments, 13 people, but it also, because there is no extradition treaty between the U.S. and Russia, it also ensures that these accusations, in our system, thankfully, you're innocent until proven guilty, so these are accusations. These accusations will never face the light of day in a court of law. So we will never know whether they made it up out of full cloth. As a matter of fact, there have been several suggestions that the whole indictment was lifted from a Radio Free Europe report that was done in 2015. All of the names that they brought in and everything. But it'll never be tested in a court of law, so it's safe. And what has it done? It's taken our attention away from a lot of other things.
Well, the assumption now is if this is all that Mueller has, and so far he doesn't have very much, but it looks like Trump is right when he say that his organization, he himself, there was no collusion with the Russians to win the election. And it looks like there's not a strong argument against that there was no collusion. They didn't address the subject of Hillary. He didn't talk about that. But his mandate wasn't to investigate Hillary. Mm-hmm. Even if it had said investigate everything, they haven't been worried. I don't think the investigation has, affected the Hillary campaign. So Trump's looking good. He didn't, it doesn't look like he'll be indicted and that he wasn't colluding with them. Hillary may be getting off scot-free, actually, because she's being ignored, but who would be totally surprised with that? But it seems to me that you cannot analyze this without thinking about foreign policy. But what was it exactly, we ought to talk about that a little bit, that they used to claim the Russians were involved? And evidently, Moon of Alabama came up with a pretty good explanation that there was somebody trying to make a few bucks, on the internet and directing traffic and getting ad money. And if it's that simplistic, it's probably pretty amazing. And it looked like the American people are gullible. The pro-Trump, the anti-Hillary, and vice versa. And as long as you click onto and they call it clickbait, if they do this means they're going to make more profits. Maybe this was just some capitalist trying to make a buck.
Yeah, and I think it is. And the Moon of Alabama's analysis has gone around quite a bit. A lot of people have talked about it. But, Yevgeny Prigozhin is a fellow who was named. He was a caterer. He actually served time in jail for theft, so he's got kind of a sketchy background. His ties to Putin are that he catered a couple of events, so that's not super close ties. But apparently he was behind, according to the Moon of Alabama analysis, basically a commercial marketing scheme where you just want to get people to click on ads. So some would be pro-Hillary, and even Fortune magazine pointed out Russia staged rallies for and against Trump to promote discord. That's what they say, but they were pro-Hillary ads, anti-Hillary ads, pro-Trump, anti-Trump, just to get people to push the hot button. And apparently a pretty big operation made probably quite a few $1,000.
But there was also one report that most of that money was spent after the election.
Yeah.
It didn't have any effect. And besides, if you compared it to the big dollar spent, if you compared that to the benefit of Trump using his Twitter account, it was probably minuscule, on the effect. But the ads that did get spent, some people say they were after the fact. So not many people are going to cling to this argument. There was a real strong conspiracy with Trump, to get the Russians to help him win this election.
Yeah, I think that's dead. And I think, as you point out, it certainly benefits Trump because, as he said over the weekend, hey, I never said the Russians weren't fooling around with our elections. I just said that we weren't colluding with them. And this, at least thus far, unless Mueller has some really big trick up his sleeve, it looks like that the whole collusion story is put to bed. But as you said, both sides do benefit.
I first started wondering what was going on and thought this whole thing was a mess from the very beginning, because when the story got out, the Russians are involved in messing around with our elections. They never asked the question how many times we do it, and I figured, well, maybe they did do a little bit, but how's that compared to the coups and all the things that we did? But nobody wanted to talk about that. But the whole thing is Trump, didn't collude at all. We know that, but there are some that still think that he could have, but they wanted to try to still blame him, and now they don't have that much evidence. But when it was started and they were appointing Mueller, my first reaction was, why is it that all the Republican leadership and the senators thought they wanted to, this is important. They may have done this. They wanted to be on the moral high ground and the first ones to be out there to advocate impeachment of the president. So they were there. But Republicans and Democrats and probably the deep state, they were all for Mueller. And in this flip-flopping around in the accusations during the campaign, the FBI would help Hillary one day, then her the next day. And all along, though, I think that the deep state was behind that. The deep state, the people behind them, liked the idea of Mueller. And eventually, Mueller now comes up with this thing, and it really fits into this assumption that Trump benefits. He sort of pseudo cleared, and maybe they'll leave him alone. And also Hillary is ignored. But it's a bipartisan attack. Mm-hmm. It's the Russians. The Russians, they're the only ones indicted. Nobody dealing with the Trump campaign or with the Hillary campaign. And we didn't hear much on the weekend about that. Especially nobody saying, well, why isn't he doing anything talking about Hillary? Even the Trump people aren't saying, hey, look, we're clean. Why aren't you messing around and checking out Hillary? No, it's the Russians. So I think this is a big victory for the deep state to march on with the antagonism toward Russia, which I think is dangerous.
And look how the week progressed last week. The pressure was building over the real collusion. There really was a foreign collusion to manipulate our elections. But the foreign collusion was a foreign intelligence agent, Christopher Steele, who was hired by Hillary Clinton to put Hillary's campaign to put together a dossier. Seems like it was completely manufactured out of thin air to discredit Trump. So here's a foreigner, a former employee of a foreign government as a spook, who comes and does a dossier that's trying to meddle in the elections. And pressure was building because they used this phony dossier to get permission to spy on Trump's campaign. Pressure was building, the FBI was looking bad, so all of a sudden you drop this big thing and no one's talking about it.
Characteristically, over the years as I watched these things evolve, when one administration gets into trouble and they're involved in corruption, a new one comes in and they're going to clean up. Inevitably, they don't prosecute. How many people ever go to jail from one administration? Matter of fact, they drop it totally and completely, and they have done this. And they play these games and try to get one up on the other side and make the Democrats look bad, make the Republicans look bad, and it's back and forth. But I don't think there's ever any serious prosecution by one administration against the other. But I think the big picture here is to pursue the anti-Russia, sentiment. And it looks like they're fairly successful at doing this.
And the thing that's interesting is there is no indication in the indictment that these were acting in any way on behalf of the Russian government. It was not tied to the Russian government at all. So if you step back and look at what they did that was so illegal, these are foreign citizens who during an election campaign expressed political views in favor of and opposed to a candidate. And so stripping it down bare, that's exactly what it is. And the other part is the financial part. And a lot of that can be explained by the sanctions that they fraudulently pretended to be Americans so they can open up PayPal accounts. But and this is an attorney cited by Moon of Alabama points out that this sets a dangerous precedent because there are a lot of people who are foreign nationals. Some of them, there was a fellow who writes for Bloomberg. He said, hold on a minute, why am I not indicted? I'm a Russian citizen. I was writing about the elections up into the elections from the U.S. So it establishes the precedent that foreign nationals are criminally prohibited from expressing views about an U.S. election, even as private citizens, unless they register as foreign agents. That is a chilling attack on speech.
You know, there's another group that I think won't be too disappointed with this, and that is the cultural Marxists. Because when you think of these charges, can you imagine, you know, if the momentum is for, well, this is true, Trump did this, and we need to march on with impeachment. I mean, this is a lot of cultural discord, and that's what they want. Anything, and this is going to be, this is not going to settle all the disputes in Washington because those disputes are coming for other reasons, for economic reasons and other reasons. But the cultural Marxists will think this is just fine and dandy, and there must be an overlap maybe with cultural Marxists and the deep state. Maybe they just participate in it because they want discord, and this is something that I think they're going to benefit by because they're going to try to come up with their utopia. The messier our situation gets,
yeah.
and the more this election becomes more confusing, the more they're going to say, well, you know, what we need to do is really crack down. So I don't think it'll be real easy to dispel the image of how the Russians were involved. I think that image is going to be there. They were involved. They're going to get away with it, and that sentiment is going to continue.
And I think that's a great point when you talk about sowing discord, because the whole point of this, when the whole thing doesn't make any sense, they can't argue because on one hand they were pro-Hillary rallies they were supposedly staging, then they were anti-Hillary, pro-Trump, anti. So it didn't make any sense. There was no rational political reason for these Russians what they supposedly did. So as coming back to what I started out saying, Fortune magazine, perfectly captures the sentiment. They set up these rallies for and against to promote discord. They want us to stop believing in our democracy, to be fighting at each other's throats as if we need any help, to be cynical about the government who spies on us, has wars overseas, and all these other things.
See, I always seem to go back to economic matters, but this is an economic problem, but they're not looking at what causes the problem. Excessive spending, debt, monetizing debt, the Federal Reserve, and the militarization of our country, and all that. They ignore that, and they turn it down, and they narrow it down to 13 Russians who need to be indicted, and it's all the Russians' fault. But that all builds, and it's a distraction from looking at what's happening, because the economy, as it deteriorates, that also feeds into the utopians who say, well, we need something different. This free market stuff doesn't work, and what we need is more authoritarian government. We need more Bernie Sanders. We need free health care, and we need more money. The prices are going up, so we need more money. This sort of attitude, and so. I think it is a distraction, from the economic problems, and they won't think about what really needs to be done, because that's, of course, a reduction of the size and scope of government, reduction of spending, and dealing with the debt and the unfunded liabilities, which are just totally out of control. And I think it was today, Paul Ryan said, the whole problem is that there's too much money spent on entitlements. There's way too much. But I've never heard somebody in leadership in the Republican Party or even in the Democratic Party seriously challenge the tremendously damaging spending on weaponry. You know, they want to take the right of an individual to own a gun, but never to curtail the use of a gun by our military. We keep building more guns and more bombs and bigger. So this episode, I think, distracts from some of the real problems we're facing.
And you're right, distracting from economic policy, but it's also a huge distraction from foreign policy. And I would close with a clip that we have coming up. But let me explain it. The hypocrisy. We love to talk about the hypocrisy. Here we are screaming about these 13 Russians, Russian citizens, who supposedly were taking out ads to influence our elections. And look, we have the former director of the CIA explaining our policy.
Have we ever tried to meddle in other countries' elections?
Oh, probably, but it was for the good of the system in order to avoid the communists from taking over. For example, in Europe, in 47, 48, 49, the Greeks and the Italians, we
don't do that now, though? We don't mess around other people's elections, Jim?
Only for a very good cause.
Can you do that? Do a Vine video on a former CIA director.
Only for a very good cause in the interests of democracy.
All right, thanks for being here. It's always great to see you.
See, it's absolutely hilarious. We meddle in other people's elections. We continue doing it. It's all one big joke.
Actually, that little clip is really tragic because of their attitude. It's an incident, and we know that way thing, but the glibness of this and the making fun and laughing it off, it just emphasizes what I'm always complaining about. Why do we as a people not compare what we do? You know, they say, well, we have to complain what they did to us, but what did we do to them? And they were just making big jokes. I guess when you own the empire, you have the money, you have the reserve currency of the world, and you have the biggest military, you can get away with this and it becomes a joke. But I tell you what, the world doesn't work that way. Eventually, it comes back to haunt us, and I think that is what we're in the middle of. We see changes in our economic system, the deterioration of the dollar, and loss of confidence. One good thing that can come from this, when we look at some of this confusion on the Justice Department, people have lost a lot of confidence in the judicial system and the FBI, and rightfully so, because they have not been on the right side of the issue. So hopefully this wakes people up and indicate to them, you know, what we need to be doing, and that is to have a constitutional government which is limited and designed to protect our liberties, and not to be pretending that we have the knowledge and the ability to go around policing the world, and we get involved in this mess that really has not a whole lot of significance by ignoring our foreign policy and our domestic monetary policy. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.